Welcome to the Innovating Health podcast. This is your host, Hubert Zajicek. All right. Welcome to our podcast. Panna Sharma is our guest here today. Thank you so much for making time, Panna. He's the CEO of Lantern Pharma, a health wildcatters portfolio company. So thanks for making time to talk with us today about innovation in healthcare and startups and all that good stuff.
Hubert, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So I know you are not the one that started the company, but obviously we'll get to your role as well. But could you just walk us through a little bit of how the company got started and the early days of Lantern Pharma?
Sure. The company Lantern was started by three scientists, drug developers, two that were at the National Cancer Institute, and one young combinatorial chemist focused on mostly kinase inhibitors. And they had the idea that by using biomarkers and genomics, and even more specifically transcriptomics, that you could understand maybe where a drug could work best. And remember they started the company in 2013, 2014. At that time, there was the beginnings of a revolution around personalized medicine because the very first biomarker medicines had begun to get approved, EGFR inhibitors and certain PSA-specific drugs. And so we realized that there are cancers that could be histologically the same, but were genomically very different. And that there were certain patients that responded well and certain ones that didn't, and that we could predict that based on the technology that was available, which was transcriptomic screening and genomic screening. And so that was the basis of the company, that, could we rescue a drug? Could we find a drug that had it had a good signal, but didn't get across the finish line? And that was the premise. It was a great premise, the premise of using genomic information to rescue a drug and put it into the right space, into the right cancer, into the right patient population. And so that was the premise. And that was how they initially raised a few $1 million from folks like yourselves and a few other good VCs in and around Texas, like BIOS and GPG.
Well, let's stick with the early days before we get to the exciting now. As you mentioned, Lantern Pharma in the early days went through the Health Wildcatters Accelerator. And I know you were not the CEO that brought it through the accelerator, but obviously we've been in touch ever since you became CEO. And so can you talk a little bit to what you've gleaned from that influence or the experience of going through the accelerator or what it has done for
you? I've been involved with many different accelerators in different forms, but I think for young entrepreneurs and for anyone starting a company, an accelerator can be a great place, especially because it gives you such a wonderful built-in peer group and a benchmark for achieving your milestones and achieving the right successes and getting guidance, kind of all in one kind of friendly umbrella. The economics of accelerators have to be looked at carefully, of course. That makes sense. But I think the concept of an accelerator is a great one, both for investors and for entrepreneurs and companies, because without an accelerator, you may struggle to build that peer network. You may struggle to ask yourself difficult questions. You may struggle because everyone in your team understands what you're doing, but maybe no one outside your 25, 50-person network understands anything about what you're doing. And you may not get exposed to that. It might take a year. It might take 2 years. And as you know, in healthcare, and especially in our space, a year or two can mean life or death. So I think any kind of place where you're given a highly concentrated ability to get feedback, to get peer guidance, and to benefit from the experience of others when it comes to meeting milestones and building a network, that's immensely valuable. Now you have to sit down and realize, is it 2 points? Is it 8 points? Is it 25 points? And then it all becomes a game of economics, right? But I think the concept of an accelerator is an extraordinary one. And I think we really are uniquely positioned in this country. The fact that we came up with these concepts, and more importantly, that we're using them to create great companies like you and your team are doing at Health Wildcatters.
Yeah, thank you. I do remember, of course, I was our second year and pretty early, and Lantern was our first pharma-related startup in our accelerator. So it was an exciting time, and certainly was a lot of uncertainty around the next forward path. But alas, all that is now history, so it worked out beautifully. But let's get to the point where you got involved in the company. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened? And then we'll talk a little bit about the next steps.
Sure. The company was about 5 years old, I think, more or less, when I got involved. And I've been here now for about 5 years, almost 5 years, a little over 4.5. I got involved as they were looking to figure out what to do with this investment. I think the company had come to some of its own limitations. The core concept was still really a good concept. And the concept is, can you use data? And this is really before the AI boom. And I came from another biotech company that was public. And I had just left there, and I started looking at companies. And I really wanted to look at companies that were using genomics and using big data to do drug development. And I knew that was going to be a big area. And cancer was my background. I really wanted to do something again in cancer because I could bring a network and a team. And so I joined in late 2018, Q4 of 2018. I think I took over, raised a little bit of money, on the way in from some folks, and then went on to do more financings and raised a little over about 100 million or so. But I came in late 2018, and the company, like any company, it had really exciting decisions to make in front of it, really, really tough decisions, everything from staffing to programs to the business model itself. And I think the key thing is I was quite upfront with the venture capitalists that were going to fund it about what my biases were about the business model and about the direction that it needed to take. And so I think that was very useful early on. But again, I wasn't the founder, so I had the benefit of being able to look at everything that had been done and help kind of go forward directions. And so that was, I think, a unique position to be in.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about those decisions you had to make? You were just alluding to those, but as you was coming on board and you had to obviously look at the budget, look at the direction, look at the things that you really felt were worthwhile, and then also decide who, as a newcomer, who do you listen to, who do you take, whose input do you take? So talk a little bit about the decisions you were facing that you think were most pivotal, that ultimately got you to be in a position to pursue the next steps, as in the IPO.
That's great. So I had some time to do some thinking about it. If I think about the choices, and again, this is really useful for all of your companies, you are not going to face difficult choices once. You're going to face them over and over and over and over. And so if you're not facing them over and over, that's great. Then you got something magical and you got a great exit and you're out of there quickly, like Mark Cuban with broadcast.com, before he even knew he had a big piece of turd on his plate. But that aside, if you're lucky enough to do that, that's wonderful. However, if you're building a sustainable company, you are going to have a lot of difficult decisions, a lot. And I think part of the challenge, and I'll get into the ones that I had, is that sometimes entrepreneurs or CEOs, heads of companies, whatever you want to call them, they're all different, right? Sometimes they don't want to accept that a difficult decision is in front of them. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge, is that every now and then I always wrestle with myself, and I like to think about, okay, well, what would I tell myself if I was not the CEO of the company? And I think that's always I love role-playing that. I love it. Part of it is because I was a consultant in my prior career, so I could kind of put on that hat. But every now and then, I like to think about that. What would not Panna the CEO, what would Panna the consultant come in and actually tell me? And it's a fun game, but it's not just a game, because sometimes there's real kernels of truth in there that you need to then sit down and explore. But the ones that I faced coming in, and again, I had much more of I would say, white space, because I didn't have the baggage of having been there and gone through the ups and downs of the early days, which is always very, very tough. But the first one was the business model. Were we a service company providing these kind of genomic and biomarker services, or did we really have some belief that our drugs were going to be valuable? Right? Were we going to be a service provider with this capability of biomarker analysis that could be really valuable for drug development, which no doubt it is. Today, all cancer is marked by biomarker-based development. That was an important one. And the second one wasn't the business model, but really the core management team. And I learned that the hard way. I can't tell you how many business school case studies I've read. Unfortunately, I've read many of them. I stopped reading them at some point in my career. One of the first things they always tell you to do is get rid of the old, start with the new. There's always a case study. XYZ president came into financial services. He kept the old group except for one guy, and the old took him 2 years too long. The products came out faulty. He started making changes 2 years later. Let's go back. You should have gotten rid of all these people. Do that. You can do that ad nauseum, company after company after company after company. All right. Well, I became CEO in 2011 of a company, and I made that mistake as the young new CEO. I wanted to keep, out of deference and respect, I kept a lot of the scientific leadership in place. Oh my God, that cost me, like every case study says, 2 years.
Wow.
In that 2 years, the world changed, and it caused me a lot of grief just managing the board and managing internal operations as opposed to executing on the plan that we knew we should have executed on. I did not make that mistake when I came into this company. We had great people, very smart, dedicated, but to me, this was an exercise in my own ability to execute. And I said, as much as I may or may not want to, I'm going to go ahead and make those changes. These need to be made. They've had 5 years. They don't have the confidence of the VCs. They haven't raised the adequate capital. But then I gave it one more chance after that. Everything, and I still stepped back and I said, okay, well, I don't want to get rid of them. What one or two things will it take for me to really want to get rid of them? And then step by step, they triggered all those things. So, the choices were very easy on me, but at least I had the knowledge and the desire to execute on the change. And that is something that I think is very important. One, be clear about your business model, which is really essential when it comes to raising capital. Be clear on your management team and be very sharp on doing that. The third is your funding route. Is it public? Is it private? Is it hybrid? Is it 5? Is it 25? All that matters, because then your business model, your team's collective capabilities have to support the funding route that you're seeking. And then finally, your own desire. This is one of the most important things, is like, what is it that you want to do? And everyone says, oh, I want to build $1 billion company. Okay. To me, as soon as you say that, it's a problem. How is it that you're going to build it? What value proposition is it? What problems are you going to solve? Is it that you're going to get there? How are you going to press the reset button? And so those questions have to be answered. And again, just to go over the 4, it's number 1, it's your business model. What is really the essential business model, and how are you going to know if it works or doesn't work? And do you have support to execute on that business? Number 2, what's your core management team? Does that core management team, is it the right management team for what you're doing? Do they have a history of success, a history of failure? Are they fatigued? Are they excited? Third, funding route. Now that you have a team and you have a business model, do you need 5 million? Do you need 25 million? Do you need 5 million now, 20 million later? Do you need 50 million? What's the funding route you're going to take? And is your team and business model equipped to take on that funding route? And then ultimately, what is it that you want to do? Is this path that you've laid out from the fundamentals, is it a path that you're uniquely qualified and excited to execute on? So I think these are all difficult choices. And it's not like some of those choices really are those choices where you have a bias, and some of those stuff that you have to really think about, late at night or over and over, but you have to have the mindset to constantly reflect on those difficult choices. And if you think things are going too smoothly, that's also a problem. So that's the other thing I always tell people. Exactly. You should know there is no eternal calm. There's going to be a storm. And so you should be prepared for that storm by going through these scenarios. What if you have to change your business? What if you have to change your team? What if the funding that you want isn't going to be there? So again, a lot of this is, just thinking about it, but you should always, I think the key challenge for any leadership is to always think about those. And, people always talk about successful journeys, but a journey is not successful because the person is. A journey is successful because of the team that it takes to prepare for it. And the team that prepares for only one journey is very lucky. But the team that prepares for 3 or 4 journeys is better prepared. And that's one of the key things I think for every young entrepreneur to think about, is that, there's no one path. There are infinite paths, really. And so you should be thinking about what's it going to take to succeed on a number of those paths.
The plan B is extremely important, to always continue to talk about things that might happen that aren't your current path, and to understand what piece of action you would take if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, and have a plan.
And plan B should take you to plan A eventually. If plan A is your plan, you should execute plan B because it can take you to plan A. And so if it doesn't, then maybe you had the wrong. So I think plan Bs are always good, but I always like to think of multiple plan As, A prime, A double prime, as opposed to B. If you're on B, in my book, maybe your overall.
Well, it's a plan B would be a pivot, right? That'd be a strategic pivot. But
that's a pivot.
But just having, I mean, and you have made this. I mean, this is abundantly clear. Speaking with you, you've had the experience of running public companies before. You've seen some stuff. You've observed way more than just having done it yourself. And you understand boards, you understand the pieces that come into the equation to make the tough decisions, and having thought through what if scenarios. If you didn't even know they can happen or they exist, then you're not going to know how to respond to them. You're going to literally invent it right at that moment.
And that's one of the best things I think of things like accelerators, is that you can bring a whole lot of different people to give you those kind of inputs that may be outside of your zone of thinking. And those, I think, unless you come from a background where you've been exposed to a lot of that. And again, I started my consulting back, a long time ago, probably long before most of your companies' CEOs were even born, back in, when was it? The mid to late 90s, and before the internet was there. So I had the experience of looking at a lot of different businesses and business models and scenarios and being a student of that. And if you don't have that, which sometimes you don't have, that's a great thing about an accelerator, is that you get people who have had those variety of experiences. You get people who have been students of different business models, different business scenarios. And that, I think, is very, very unique. You didn't have that option in the past, and that's a great option for companies to have today.
Well, that's spot on, and absolutely, we want our startups to learn from our 150 mentor investors and people who've exited companies and people who've done many of these things before, so that they don't have to go through and experience every single one of these challenges, but could rather learn from some of them too before it's too late. But for the most part, what I want them to take away is to remove as much as possible blind spots. So we're not going to be able to teach everything. We're not going to have all the solutions. We're not here to teach per se, but what we are here is to create awareness around every single aspect of your business, both that can be a positive breakout or a negative breakout for your chosen path. Also, to keep an open mind and be coachable. So those are all very important pieces. As we are talking about change or preparation, rather, so let's look a little bit at the pre-IPO phase. You came on board and made a few changes, and talk a little bit about that process of positioning your company for this successful IPO in a really trying time too. So it was quite the feat, but it didn't happen from overnight. So talk about the important steps and decisions you took once you decided to take this path.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to tell you, when I came here, I certainly wasn't thinking IPO. Having just come from a public company, I definitely wanted to take a break from the public market. So, plus, we needed the data, right? We needed to have the type of data that would showcase that we were really being a novel therapeutic company using data and AI. We didn't have a sufficient amount of that. We certainly had a story, but we didn't have the validated internal proof points in our business model. And so we had to do a private round when I got in, which was great. And I really thought the next round was also going to be a private round. But we actually had some really good progress with both the AI platform and also in licensing a therapeutic compound that we could put into trials quite rapidly. And so I think just based on some of those things, and also based on the team that I was able to, I think there was the option that, there were bankers and people that were interested in what I was doing next, and so I think a number of them said, oh, this is kind of an interesting space, these kind of data, genomically driven AI companies. It wasn't quite even, AI wasn't quite the buzzword yet, but people were beginning to talk about it. So I think there was the concept where I had a network that was interested in what is this thing that we were doing. And we were making enough progress fast enough that some of the banks that I had discussions with were like, wow, this could really make an exciting company. You should think about this out. And as you meet your milestones, and let's stay in touch. And maybe when you have some data or in a year from now, et cetera. So we were in the midst of actually preparing to do a private round. And at the time, there was an interest in another company in our space. Really, the stock was going really wild. It had gone from like $8 to like 30 or 40 or $50. And so there was an interest because, we knew a lot of the same companies and people were really following in that kind of trajectory. And so there was interest from public investors in more companies like that. I had a good relationship with the CEO of a couple of the banks. And there was enough interest that I said, you know what, we should actually explore what a public route would look like. Now, having been public and having taken a company public and taken another company public before that and been on the chair of the advisory board of another company, I've taken companies public on NASDAQ, been the chair of an advisory board on the New York Stock Exchange company. So I kind of knew the process and I knew a lot of the good and bad. You learn how to do something right by oftentimes not doing it right? So when I was at Lantern, I didn't have the same pocketbooks that I might have had. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to do it much more efficiently. I'm going to get us ready super efficiently. And part of that is your team. I had a great CFO that I brought on. I had a great CSO that I brought on who had experience in working with me. So we didn't have to have 5-day-long meetings. We could get done in 1 hour because of the history. We had a shorthand. He knew what I wanted, what the expectations were. And so we were able to be hyper efficient. And we knew we could get the company ready for any kind of diligence that you would probably want to go through, either in a public or a large private round. And so the company was getting some momentum. And so we were preparing for either a large private round and at the time, or a public round. And one of the biggest challenges is that people were always asking me, well, do you want to go public or private? And I said, I don't really care. It's just what is the cheapest cost of capital? And I remember having this discussion with our board. And they said, well, you're going to do this micro IPO. And I said, well, it just comes down to cost of capital. The cost of capital is the most important thing because the IPO to me is not an exit. And for you VCs, if it's an exit, then you're probably not investing in the right space because you don't invest in a therapeutic company to exit 2 years later. You're going to fund it properly. So I think the big takeaway there for people is keep all your options, keep your options open and be ready. And being ready is the most important thing because a lot of people have conversations, but they don't know what the conversations mean next. That means you have to have a data room. You have to have financials that are ready. You have to have a playbook. You have to have a marked up S1. And so just that process, just comes through experience or having been through it a few times. And if you don't have $1 million to do it right, can you do it for less? And so the good thing is our team had done it before, both public and private. And so we were able to do a vast amount of the work internally. I was a former banker and consultant. My CFO was a former securities attorney. So we had a lot of the skills and capabilities to take things to the, to the 10-yard line, right, ourselves before spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we were ready for both tracks, a large private or a public. Then, of course, as you know, the pandemic hit. So that to me was really, really a wild time. I mean, I still, even thinking about it, my stomach still, I remember the day that happened and a day or two later and the markets just cratered and deals were all off the table. I mean, we had some capital that would have lasted like another 10 months or so. But God, I remember my stomach was in a knot. I mean, no one could prepare for that. No one could prepare for what happened in March of 2020. Just as we were just hitting strides, right? We raised the first few million. We got some things done. We had milestones. We in-licensed a drug. We made some good 3 publications at AACR, all the right kinds of things. And then just the world changed. And so that was a really, really challenging time.
Well, I mean, in all reality, I think, there are things you prepare for, there are things you can prepare for, but there are also things that are imprudent to prepare for. I mean, you are in a risk pool. You are a startup taking a certain path. And if you were to prepare for some crazy pandemic event by putting 2 years worth of money aside, that's imprudent. I mean, so there's really not a solution there that you can have pull out of your hip pocket and say, oh, I have this here, because everyone would look at you as like, why did you raise this money at that cost to sit on for 2 years just as insurance? So there's just some things that you can't prudently do. You'll be just run out of town. But certainly you were able to execute despite these challenges. You did have a prudent amount of capital still, but you did go ahead and push it through. And can you talk?
At the time we had about 10 months, but the 10 months would not have been at the level of execution that I wanted. That would have been really a stretch. And we were quite upfront with the board. Yeah. So I think once I digested that, hey, we're in not a 2-3 week event. And I remember when the pandemic first came around, we were talking both the public and private routes. And I knew the next route had to be, $20-30 million round. It was quite challenging, but we were ready for it. And so I remember being very honest with the board and transparent with the investors that, hey, we're going to run out of money in 10 months, max. We all took a pay cut across the board. So we all went to, 80% or 75% of salary. We cut activity on external spend. We reevaluated everything. And I said, look, we can make it 10 months by not getting much done. We maybe make it 12. And we think maybe this pandemic is here. We were thinking like 4 months max, right? 4 months. Wow. But we prepared. And that's the key thing, is that we prepared early on. We were not ostriches with our head in the sand. And one of the biggest challenges oftentimes is that people who are founders or entrepreneurs or CEOs, they almost think about their failure to prepare for these esoteric kind of black swan events as their failure, which it isn't. Everyone wants to help you. No one wants companies to fail in this country. I mean, if you're a short seller, other things, if you're a bad person, yes. But I'm saying typically our industry is an industry that wants to do things well, right? And people want to help you succeed. So if you're honest with people and you let them know what actions you're taking to make the best use of their dollars and make them part of the decision making, hey, we can burn more, but we'll be done in 6 months. We can burn less, and we can be done in 10. We think the pandemic will be 3 or 4 months. I mean, that was the thought. I mean, everyone thought 3 or 4 months, right? I mean, yeah. I went to bankers. I went to all the infectious disease specialists. I listened to every single, guru. Maybe that was a bad decision, but it was no one thought it was going to be a year or two. No one. And so we said, look, we think we can get through this pandemic. We think we should go for the 10-month plan, and we want to still be active in the market, giving updates. But we also want to let people know we're not as active because we're not going to hit the milestones unless we burn capital. And that's just, so we're going to reduce our capital burn, extend it. We're going to pretend this period didn't exist. And we think we'll be fine on the other side. And so I think that was really good because it made investors and the board feel like they were part of that decision-making process, which is very important. And this all happened like literally within 2 or 3 days of us realizing what was in front of us. So it was very, very aggressive about getting this done. And then we saw the markets beginning to open up, obviously, with the Moderna and with the other deals around COVID. And this was another decision. We were presented a COVID company because we were a good company. We had good management and knew how to run things, and we could do a bigger round. And someone said, well, why don't you acquire one of this COVID company I have, and you guys can get COVID money and do all this. And that was a strategic decision what we made. Again, going back to some of those fundamentals, what's our core management team good at? Not COVID, not infectious disease. What's our funding route? Probably not COVID. We don't know DARPA and the government. We don't have the infrastructure we could do that, sure, but that wasn't what we were good at. Our capital needs were not pandemic related. Could we have raised it? Yes. We could have executed on that model. Yes. It would not have been the right model to execute on. And so we made the tough decision. And I remember going to one of our VCs and saying, no, I'm not going to acquire that COVID asset you had.
Yeah.
I said, and so that was a tough decision. Maybe it pissed them off. Maybe it didn't. But I said, you know what? I think this will be over soon and we'll have other opportunities. And so we did. Literally within 2 weeks after that, the markets were looking quite hungry for biotech assets. And since we were ready, we were top of the queue. And that's one of the things. We were top of the queue. Audits ready, marked up S1 ready, board ready. Everything was ready to execute either way. And then given that we were ready, of course, everyone knew we were ready. And then we were presented with a term sheet from the private guys. So we had a term sheet. We were going to start a roadshow. Of course, this is what always happens, right? Now they know you're going to go public. Now you're ready to go public. We get a term sheet on Wednesday or Thursday. We get a term sheet, private. So that means I would call off the S1, wind that down, save it for a later date, and take the private round, which was, kind of guaranteed. I mean, I knew most of the investors. So the chance of that going to zero is pretty low because it had already been circulated and talked about and socialized with some board members. So they were going to do a private deal. The cost of capital was higher. They wanted to control the board, which would have been okay if that was the right decision. That was not a make or break. But I'm just saying that the cost of capital was higher and the cost of the socialization was higher. So that didn't sit well with me. And I saw the markets in biotech were just percolating. You could see that there was something going on. There was an interest. And so when we went public in June, like 2 months after this, we said no to the capital. And that was a tough decision. To look at my CFO and everyone else, I said, hey, we're going to run out of money. And it wasn't 10 months anymore. Now it was like 6 months. We're going to run out of money in 6 months, or we're going to do this public offering. Now I'm going to do the public offering. But they were very supportive and they were on board. And then we raised 26.5 million or so in the initial offering, and then another 70 in the follow-on. So those are the right decisions. And of course, the cost of capital was much lower and the control was much greater for us. So those are all tough decisions. But it comes down to knowing your business model, knowing what you're going to execute on, and being really aware of cost of capital and your ability to execute.
So, well, thank you. Wonderful. That's exactly what I was going to ask. There's always a kind of a last minute intervention. It seems there's almost always some last minute moving around and how many shares will be sold and what should we set the IPO price at. And I know that comes down to the wire, but sometimes there's also a private offer in there that makes you potentially stop, which could also halt your momentum. And then so being ready at that level is extremely important, because otherwise, had you not done all those things that prepare you for a public offering, you wouldn't have had other options. So you really allowed for the company to have options, and then made what certainly I believe is the right decision and executed on a successful IPO. And didn't get to ring the bell, I assume, because it was in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know if do they ever schedule you for that, like at some later point, or is it something you just say, you know what, forget about it when it's too far down the...
I personally don't have much interest in that activities. I mean, it's a waste of a day for me.
Okay. Yeah, no,
it's not a bell anyway. It's a buzzer on NASDAQ. Press a buzzer. We might do it this year if it makes sense or not. But at the time, you're right, the pandemic, it would have been nice to have done it. Not for me, but I think for our team. And I remember when I first told my wife that I was going to take Lantern public.
You're still married, right?
And she looked at me, and we had just had like, I think a team meeting in Atlanta and had some people over for dinner and all that. And I remember telling her like a couple months later, you know what, I'm thinking about doing this public offering. And she's like, with those guys that were over, I'm like, yeah. And she looked at me and she goes, okay. She was like, you're going to take it? I'm like, yeah, I think so. I think I'm going to do it. And so as I explained it to her, that was good to get. She's like, yeah, okay, well, maybe this does make a lot of sense. That I just think that was funny. But when we went public, we were 6, maybe 7 people. I mean, we were probably one of the smallest IPOs, which, set a precedent for other smaller IPO type companies at the time. And of course, after that, there were about 80 other biotechs that went public that were under 10 people, which really had not been done until that time frame, which is great. It doesn't mean that they're all going to be healthy and vibrant companies. As biotech, it'll be 10% of them, but I think the chance that you have to make a difference and create these new medicines and create a difference in the science is great. I think the vast majority of them wanted to do the right things. Of course, there's always scammy companies, but most of them I think were good companies. So that's
Well,
my thing.
well, thank you. That was really helpful. I want to at least round us out with a snapshot of Lantern now, the team you have, and the kind of sense of innovation that you're fostering in your team, and you're leading a company. So there's the public aspect and there's the leadership aspect in your enterprise. Maybe speak a little bit to the culture, and then let's look a little bit at the innovation, where you are now and where you're going with the company, to kind of round us out here in a few minutes. And then
Because the capital and the team, we've been able to really press the accelerator on innovation in a way that I don't think we could have necessarily done as a private company. But more importantly, it's a fairly demanding culture. And I know we have got 5 core values. There were 4, and we added another one. So we were 5 core values that everyone understands. And the first of all of them is knowledge. And so we impart that we're not here to do a job. We're here to generate and create new knowledge. And we have to be constant students of knowledge. The second core value is innovation. Innovation is prized. We're not here to execute someone else's plan. We're actually here to innovate and do things totally differently or that have not been done before. And the third one is collaboration. Because innovation is a challenging thing, you have to collaborate inside and outside our 4 walls, because there are people who are much more knowledgeable than we are about things we're trying to achieve. But unless you collaborate with them, you're not going to get it accomplished. And so that requires a certain way of thinking, requires a certain ability to be humble about your own achievements and be honest about your own shortcomings, to collaborate properly. And then leadership. You can be really knowledgeable and innovative, but unless you have the team or the ability or the capabilities to lead, that's what makes commercial success, is you have to have leadership. And the final is integrity, because we are in a very unique space around cancer and cancer patients and being custodians of public capital. We have to have high levels of integrity as a small company. And we always hear about that in pharma, that integrity gets challenged. And so we added integrity very recently as a 5th core value to remind us that even though we have to be innovative, even though we have to be leadership oriented, we can't fail on the most important, which is we have to really have integrity about what we're doing is and how we're doing our research and how we're doing everything. So those 5 core values are very important. The team, I think, has been very good at being almost self-selective. Either someone's going to work or they're not going to work. And it's not based on me or the CFO. It's based on the team. And so I think we have a really self-selecting kind of culture. It's got its own kind of immune system. If you're not going to live those core values and you're not going to be a meaningful contributor, knowledge is not a top of mind issue, it's probably you're not going to last. Right. And so I think that is very important for leaders to think about, is what is that culture that they want to build. But more importantly, just talking about it, you actually have to take time to reward people that do it well, make examples of it, and also put programs in place. Like we have programs in place. Like we had a program last year called $1 Million Challenge, where we would fund $1 million for ideas that the management and leadership were not thinking about. What should we do next as a company for our AI platform, for drug development, for new drugs, for combinations, for new trial? What $1 million for the team that comes up with it. And we encourage people not to come up with their own ideas. We encourage people to do it in a team format so they collaborate with people. So we found ourselves now, we're living our core value, collaboration, knowledge, innovation, and we're encouraging innovation outside of whatever Panna or David or Kishore or Reggie, the leaders come up with. We want innovation. And so I think living core values is very important. Coming up with programs. We do hackathons. Not just like feel good, slap yourself in the back hackathons, you write a check to someone, but real detailed. We go to people who are level experts in programming languages and topics that may or may not have an impact on us, and have some really exciting results. And again, that's living your core value of innovation. But to do those hackathons, you have to collaborate. You got to collaborate with universities. You got to collaborate with people who may or may not fully understand what you're doing or how you're doing it. So again, I think if you can, as a leader, find ways where you raise your core values to actually be so that they're just understood. You don't have to say it's just understood. You can't do a hackathon properly and not be innovative, right? And not be collaborative internally. So we try to push programs like that internally and externally. And sometimes it's small little things, like it could be even small things like people predicting what the name of our next trial is. It's fun to do that, right? Why hire a naming agency? You can tell teams to come up internally and do it. Or how about, so I think that kind of stuff is really important in a company, and it helps build kind of I would say, the nervous system of a company that extends beyond just one or two personalities.
Yeah, very good. Well, yeah, I think we're almost at the end here. Anything you want to share on?
Well, hopefully you're not asleep yet. So hopefully
I could talk forever. I just want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about kind of where you are right now and where you're going and kind of what you're excited about.
I mean, every one of our programs I'm pretty excited about. We wouldn't be doing it if I weren't personally excited about it. Every program requires some tweaking and nurturing and refinement because cancer is moving so rapidly. I would say the one thing in people on these journeys, especially in healthcare, is that things take a lot longer than you think. Again, I learned that the hard way, right? So I always would think things would take a year, they take 2. I think things would take a year and a half, they take 4. So things take longer. Be prepared for that and raise capital around that. Be prepared to change all the time. That's really important because the therapy that is before you is going to change the whole game. And you better be ready to kill a program as a result of that. And we've done that as well internally. So be prepared to change. And then be very, very prepared to change not your programs, but also your people. So someone who's successful for you for a certain period of time may not be the right person long-term. And including you as the founder, the entrepreneur, the CEO, all that. So those are challenges. I think I'm most excited in Lantern. I think that our biggest successes really are yet to come. I mean, I think the day where we can say we've saved 10, 20,000 patient lives as a result of one of our drugs, I mean, that would be so massively powerful, right? More than raising 100 or 200 or $500 million. If you can say, hey, look, we've affected these 50,000 patients or these 70,000 families, that's a really big deal. And so I think those successes will happen and probably make not only myself, but really our entire team really proud. And I think that's the kind of legacy our team can leave, is that we can leave legacy that we can make cancer drugs faster, we can make them cheaper, we can make them more personalized, and that we really can transform a small corner of medicine and use that as a blueprint for how we can make medicines for 10 times cheaper than they're made today. And if we can do that, that's unbelievable, Mark. And that's what we hope to try to achieve.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for joining us today, Panna, and I wish you all the best. Obviously, for all of our own sakes, cancer is still a big scourge, and innovation is dearly needed. You have led the charge with Lantern to really do things differently and make a big dent. We're looking forward to the future and the impact you can have on people. And
we're looking forward to it. I mean, we have 3 active trials, so I think we're, for a small 24-person company, that's a lot of activity. So 3 active trials that are in the clinic today, and probably another 4 or 5 active preclinical programs. So it is a very, very busy time. I mean, our challenges now are exciting, but different than the challenges we had when we were scaling up or starting up. But they're all challenges. It's like they don't go away. That's one thing for any entrepreneur CEOs. The challenges don't go away. They're just going to be different and different and different. And so you have to have the stomach to want to deal with it. So that sometimes you're 100% ready for it and sometimes you're not. But I think that's the only constant in being a CEO in our space, is that challenges are ever present.
Okay. Yeah, well said. Well, thank you for making time to record this with us and for making yourself available, as you have done many times before, for younger generations or up and coming entrepreneurs. And I've seen this firsthand as well. Certainly you're paying it forward, and we greatly appreciate that. So thanks for joining us
Thank
today.
you. Thank you.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Innovating Health podcast. Be sure to follow, give us 5 stars, and subscribe to stay updated to the latest cutting-edge innovations and revolutionary ideas shaping the future of healthcare.